Okay. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of It's Bigger Than Biotech. I'm your host, Hriday, Director of True Pharma and a student at USC.
And I'm Vishnu, a software engineer and machine learning and neuroscience researcher, aspiring to be a neurotech entrepreneur also here at SC. And today, we have an incredible guest joining us.
Yeah, today we have Philip Sell, the CEO and co-founder of Metaba, a company at the forefront of metabolomics and biopharmaceuticals, tackling infectious diseases like tuberculosis and COVID-19. He has a background in molecular microbiology and immunology from USC's Keck School of Medicine, and Philip has been deeply involved in researching SARS-CoV-2, antimicrobial resistance, and the power of metabolomics in drug development. In today's episode, we're going to explore a lot of things, including his journey, a little bit about metabolomics, and also about the things he's working on. So yeah, glad to have you on the show, Phil.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And of course, I'm honored to share my experience. Hopefully something I can say can be of use to one of our listeners at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. That's the vision. Let's get started. We want to start off by asking you about your role as the CEO and co-founder at Metaba. What does a day look like?
Okay, that's a tough question because it's very dependent on the day, right? Mm-hmm. One day I can be literally just nose in the screen, working on grants, not looking at my phone the whole day, to just constantly sending out messages, trying to coordinate, different projects. So it can vary very much from day to day. Sometimes going into the wet lab, doing experiments, sometimes really having like deep one-on-ones about specific topics and going into deep strategy, or just networking events and talking to others on a broader level. So that's kind of a hard question to answer on the day-to-day. As you can imagine, early startup phase entrepreneurship, you're wearing a lot of hats and you're doing a lot of different things, and it can change on a dime.
Yeah, definitely, especially with a growing stage company just starting off. The amount of hats you have to wear is like it's insane, right? Like, it's amazing what you're doing. And honestly, like, your background in of itself, you started off into research first, and then it was a huge step into entrepreneurship. So could you tell me about how that journey was from going into research and then going into entrepreneurship? Was it easy? What were the challenges? What were some things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I may, this might be a little bit of a longer answer, because it was an interesting trajectory, filled with serendipitous events, one after another, that kind of led me to where I am today. I can confidently tell you a couple years ago, I would have not believed you if you told me I'd be where I am today. So starting back from really the beginning of it, right there, my father was a physician, a lot of research and medical history in my family's background. So there's a lot of influence there. And from a very young age, that's naturally where I thought I would go. And I always loved math and science. It was interesting to me, especially biology. And so I continued on that path, and maybe I'll try to focus more on the biotech entrepreneurship phases, but started out at UCLA in undergrad studying, the major is MIMG, which stands for microbiology, immunology, and molecular genetics.
Okay.
So these are big mouthful majors, basically just microbiology. And then long story short, I had kind of been undecided at that moment because there was a lot of interests and things that intrigued me, and I wasn't really sure of my direction, And so I'd actually taken some time off to reflect on which path I really wanted to go. And then coming back, I kind of reconfirmed the fact that I wanted to follow biology in some fashion. And so after undergrad, I came over to Keck for a master's in molecular microbiology and immunology, MMI, not only to continue my education in the space, but also, really to bolster my application for MD PhD programs, because that was my goal at the time. Mm-hmm. And that was my goal because I wanted to have the largest impact with the research that I was doing. And naturally, I thought MD PhD, right, that would help me span, trying to translate technologies from the lab into the clinic, ultimately helping the patient, thereby having a large impact, right? And so the first sort of serendipitous event occurred when I started the master's program and I had joined a virology lab. And after my first semester, a principal investigator of the lab ended up moving on to another institution. And so I had to find a new lab. And this, I think, was an important kind of pivotal moment because I would have never chosen a lab that studies tuberculosis originally, right? Because there's not that many cases in the United States. You don't really hear much about it here. So I then thought, why would I want to study this, right? Is there going to be an impact? And then lo and behold, I realized how much of a problem it is worldwide and also how interesting tuberculosis is, especially from the metabolomics perspective.
Okay.
And so still at that time, I was interested in bolstering my application. And the main driver of that decision to go to the tuberculosis lab was because of their ability in metabolomics.
Okay.
Right. And this being a hot research topic and people wanting to include this into their studies, it, afforded the opportunity of collaborations and therefore the potential for more scientific publications, which would bolster my application. And so anyways, that's where I met my co-founder, Joey.
Right.
He was the postdoc that had trained me during my graduate work. And what happened after I defended my thesis, so this was in 2021, and this opportunity came up to do research on coronavirus, right? And at the time, I decided this would be a good opportunity to pursue at the moment, and the application will wait. And in that time, I think it gave me the space to develop a little bit more some of the ideas around forming the startup. And so one of the similarities with coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 and tuberculosis or Mycobacterium tuberculosis are these are pathogens that you have to work in a high containment lab. And one of the requirements of these labs, because emergency personnel they will not enter them under any circumstance, you kind of have to go in as a buddy system, right? So if something were to happen, you need to give CPR, you need to basically decontaminate the person and get them to a point where the emergency professionals can take it from there. And so even though I was doing research on coronavirus and Joey was still doing research on tuberculosis, we remained very close because a lot of the times we had to align our schedules. And so this kind of started with our coffee conversations, thinking about our schedules for the week and the experiments and the timing, and then always kind of ideas, right? And so I almost got to continue my training under him, even though I was in a different position. And so it got to the point where we believed the science was really strong and we were very excited about it. And we decided to start a company around it. And then that was actually based on research from a USC lab where we, using the technique of metabolomics, had identified a new drug target. And not to get into the details of tuberculosis pathology, but basically it's a metabolic shift that allows the bacteria to feed off of the fat stores in their cell wall. So it's similar to like a bear hibernating, right? They can lay dormant, survive for long periods of time without nutrients, without oxygen, which are usually, now I'm getting into the science of it.
Yeah.
But this is important because this is the reason tuberculosis current standard of care is about 6 months of 4 different antibiotics, give or take.
Right.
Which is a very long time to be taking antibiotics. And this is a big problem. And this is what a lot of tuberculosis research is geared towards. Like, how can we shorten this treatment regimen so people can have like higher percentage of adherence and, less antibiotic resistance. So that's where we started. Since then, it's kind of been a whirlwind of different, experiments, collaborations, pilot studies, and that adjunctive therapeutic might not be our highest priority because we found some pretty interesting compounds that are directly killing the bacteria, which is, of course, more exciting to develop from a commercialization perspective than something that you have to use with current treatments. And on top of the therapeutic development, expanding from tuberculosis into other bacteria, reaching larger markets. We've also been exploring different use cases for metabolomics because this is a technique we have expertise in. There's value there. And I think the attractive thing about that is, there's not a massive regulatory obstacle course to get to market. We can provide these analysis services today, right? Okay. And we do for different labs and companies. Even beyond that, we're exploring how we can make the power of metabolomics more accessible. And we can get into some of that, I probably answered a couple of questions you already had too, but there's the story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, one thing that metabolomics is a very common term we're using right now. So just for our listeners, what exactly is metabolomics?
Yes, great question. Metabolomics is the study of metabolites and metabolism, and most of the techniques use mass spectrometry. There's different technical differences and methods, but what we primarily use is liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry, commonly known or abbreviated as LCMS. And these are the chemistry techniques to separate and detect these small molecule components in a sample. And then the important part where we really come in, right? Because we can shoot these samples, but the important part is the interpretation of the data, right? What do these abundances of specific metabolites mean in the context of a biological system? And so that's really kind of our bread and butter.
Okay, cool.
That's very interesting. So you talked about, how you were in research and were bolstering your application for MD, PhD programs. But I also assume that you had to apply for lots of things during your research, even for the MS. And then you went into startups. So comparing that to what our listeners are here for, lots of them want to go into recruitment for startups and other things in biotechnology and biopharmaceutical studies. So how does recruiting talent for a startup differ from traditional research roles?
That's a great question. I mean, even your question sparked a lot of thoughts in that area, kind of deciding your path, right? Because I know myself included, I think a lot of students feel pressured to go a certain route, maybe because of their parents, maybe because of society, what this idea of success or prestige is around a career. And, the reason I say this is because even though, these serendipitous events kind of led me to where I am today, it still wasn't necessarily easy to make the decisions, right? Like I was pre-med and I was applying to med schools. I took the MCAT a couple times, and this is something I invested a lot of time and effort into applying for, right? And also this was an identity I'd started building as a child with the medical background in my family, right? So it still wasn't easy to let go. What's the point that I want to make here? I think it's important to follow your heart, your calling. And sometimes it can be really hard to hear that with all the voices and distractions outside of ourselves, maybe telling us what they think we should be doing. And on that note, I think I attribute a lot of my self-awareness to a daily meditation practice. And I attribute my ability to see these bigger signs in my life and helping me make those decisions more clear to this practice. So that being said, I took a very non-traditional path, and I think I would almost recommend it, right? I think a lot of the times we're pushed into a traditional path, and why is this traditional, right? Like maybe it did serve a purpose in previous times where there's this goal in mind and this is the way to get it, but the world is constantly changing and so quickly, and especially with industries like biotech, anything related to technology. I mean, we all see how quickly it's evolving. And I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here, but just follow your interests and find something that you really enjoy. I don't know if it's on my question list, but I saw it on Farhad's.
Yeah.
And one of them was like, what do you dislike about what you do?
Yeah.
And that was the one that really, I don't remember any of the other questions. That was the one that stuck out to me. And I really had to think about it. Like, what do I dislike about what I'm doing right now? And I don't think I have a good answer for that, right? Because I truly enjoy every aspect of it. Like, yes, there are times that it can be a little grueling and I'm losing sleep and I'm working hard and I'm not able to do certain things that also give me pleasure. But at the same time, I enjoy that. And I think the important thing there is the mission, right? If you're following the mission, it gives you a bigger purpose. And I guess to kind of tie it into the question, it's like aligning your life and what you're working on with that mission, something that means a lot to you. And to be frank, doesn't matter what other people think you should be doing,
Yeah. I mean, you made a lot of amazing points there. Like, for example, what is a traditional career path? You can choose whatever career path you want. There's no traditional one path to get there. And the world is changing. And also, you talked about the underlying factors as well. Like, people want to find success in their careers. But what is the meaning of that success? Most people don't know, right? So it's all about reflection. And you also mentioned a few things you should be doing, like meditating for it, right? But overall, slightly shifting topic there, what would you say is more different? You're wearing multiple hats, right? So recruiting for a startup in and of itself must be very tough from like maybe a more structured company. So what would you look for like in candidates who want to work at a startup?
Yeah, and thank you for reiterating the question a little bit, because I don't think I really answered it.
No, that was a great answer.
No,
though.
that's an amazing answer.
Thank you. I mean, this is a hard question to answer as well, because it can depend on what is needed at the time.
Yeah.
Right. So of course there's the baseline like technical ability to achieve whatever objective is. But the thing that I think is probably the most important is like, I don't want to say the essence of a person, but I look at it holistically, right? And I think to put it into an example, like with seeking out a mentor, right? And these will be extreme examples. You can have a mentor who is the top CEO of this top pharmaceutical, all this experience, all these connections, and just like, how can it get any better?
Right.
And you have someone, okay, maybe not as much experience, etc., but this person believes in what you're doing and they want to help. And that's something that I will choose the person that wants to help and believes in the mission over the highly qualified individual that like might not even have time for me. So that's in the context with mentorship. That also translates to recruitment. I think it's difficult to encapsulate startup recruitment because there's not like very clearly defined roles that you're recruiting for, where that might be the case in a company. But I think it's been advice I've given before to people looking for roles. And one thing this might be one of the quotes that stuck with me. One of the things I heard someone say was like, the best time to look for a job is when you already have one. And another thing I was taught early on is like, you really need to put your feet on the pavement. Right? Because if you're just throwing out a bunch of resumes to different job boards and just kind of blasting it broadly, you are a number in a stack of resumes, right? The most important thing you can do is follow up with the recruiting manager, follow up with someone in that organization. It doesn't even have to be specifically about this role. I think sometimes even just asking for advice can be extremely effective in landing a potential role at a company. The other thing too is kind of back to like the maybe social pressures of prestige and success. A lot of the time, and I suffered from this too. It's like, I just finished undergrad and I have these grandiose ideas of the job I'm going to land right afterwards, and it's like, that's not really how the world works, and so don't, discount smaller company opportunities, because a lot of the time you're going to get more personable training there, and you're probably going to learn a lot more than at a large corporation as well. Hopefully that kind of sheds some light on my perspective in the recruitment.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you said. And the previous answer about the fact that you want to make impact, and that big switch from what other people in your family or in your environment are telling you to do to what you actually want to do, and figuring out what your heart wants to do. I think those are great personality traits of a founder, right? And I know that both me and Hriday, we want to be founders, and lots of people listening want to be founders. So any advice for students or researchers who are trying to be first founders and then biotech founders specifically?
Man, the best advice I can give is don't give up, really. And that kind of goes back to the mission. It kind of goes back to, where you really want to apply your efforts. And, if you're interested in entrepreneurship and you're interested in starting a business, you will find a way, right? It's definitely not for everybody. There's a lot of people that are more risk averse and wouldn't even consider it. So the fact that you're considering it is huge. And I think it's a very admirable venture to try to add value to this world in a big way. I can say from my experience, being more scientifically, technically trained as a scientist and coming into the entrepreneurship side of things, for me is extremely, extremely valuable to network and learn from other individuals. And when I first founded the company, one of the thoughts I had was like, well, where should I found the company? Like, is LA the best place for me to start this thing? Which I had to really think about, because I've done all my education in LA. I've started to build my life here. I'm originally from New York. But, you can't ignore the fact that there's much larger resource hubs in Boston and San Diego and San Francisco. Might it be better to start there? I think for me, LA was the best place because although these other hubs might have more resources, to me it seemed a little bit more competitive, and it was important for me to be more open. And I found in the LA ecosystem, even though it's much smaller and younger, there's more of a community effort to build the ecosystem. Right. And so I think a lot of the other biotech CEOs in the area have been much more collaborative, much more willing to share their experience, what they've learned. And that was extremely important to me as a scientist coming into the business side of things. And I am thankful for everyone that I've learned from. There's too many to mention.
I think that's super cool. You talked about just the community of biotech people or startup people here in LA not being as competitive as the other places, but still like pushing each other to be just like build and build. Let's talk about the talent. What are the challenges in attracting talent to early stage companies, and how do you address those?
Great question. And kind of to piggyback on the last answer in terms of talent, this is why there's been such a big effort to retain talent in LA, right? We have amazing schools like UCLA, USC, Caltech, amazing trainees in STEM and I mean pretty much any major discipline, and then they end up going to these other hubs and working for other biotechs, and we're here like, okay, well, we've trained these amazing people, but why aren't they staying? And so that's why there's such a strong community effort to make LA, Southern California in general, a larger hub to retain this talent. And who wouldn't want to live in LA? I mean, the weather's beautiful, amazing food, great place, the beach, the mountains not far away. I mean, there's so many reasons to stay. So why can't biotech be another reason? I mean, I think it will be, and it kind of is already, in my opinion. In terms of the recruiting talent, that again could be more of a case by case answer. So you might have people that are interested in specific areas, people interested in the mission that you're doing. I'm not even sure what I can say about recruiting and retaining talent. I think it's not something I've been very conscious of necessarily. Like I'm looking to recruit somebody. I think just from my networking and meeting people and exchanging ideas, how do I describe it? It's almost as if like certain people have been attracted to me in a way, and there seem to be like similarities and there seem to be overlaps in what our goals are. And that's kind of how the team has come together, at least at Metaba, and collaborations as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for our company. And yeah, I think the way it's worked for me is just be true to the mission, true to the goal, be upfront and honest and clear with what you're doing. People respect that. And that also from my side, like if you put it all on the table and explain them what it is, then they can make a clear decision on what they want and if they want to be involved. So I don't know if that really answers the question.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
good.
It definitely answers the question. I mean, it's all about more modern terms, the vibes, right? It's more about the vibes that you output, and maybe the other person may find that like good and they want to work. And I feel like it's more of a mission that drives people to work at startups. It's maybe not the money there. It's about the mission. It's about the impact. But taking a step back, let's move one step back to when you were doing your master's at Keck. How did your academic background prepare you for your current role?
The academic background definitely prepared me for my current role. I think there's definitely a baseline of scientific knowledge that you need to, not only understand, but be able to design, execute experiments around, especially if you're in biotech. I mean, if you're leading a company, maybe you're not necessarily as hands-on. It depends on the situation, but I think having a broad understanding of science and how it works, that informs everything else. And I think kind of expanding that from just like the specific education, that's kind of my philosophy. I just love learning. So that's why I think like, even if I'm not interested in practicing medicine, I'll probably still have a good time in med school, right?
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds,
Right.
like I'm that dude. Like I just enjoy learning. And I think that's played in my benefit in a lot of ways, because I learn about corporate structure. I learn about IP litigation. I learn about all these different areas of biotech business, commercialization, regulatory, and I don't have to be the professional in that area, right? Because ultimately, like if I'm writing a new patent, yes, there's a lot of work I can do, especially from the science side, but I'm going to leave it to a professional to like have the polished version. But I think in making strategic decisions, in understanding the complexities of trying to get a business off the ground, especially in biotech, the more you know, the more informed decisions you can make. So I think it's been really beneficial for me to have that broad kind of understanding of a lot of different subject areas and combining that. And I think also from the expansion of science, like I think the thing that attracted me to science in the first place was the problem solving aspect, right? You know, it's like, how can we design this experiment to answer this question with these tools, right? Like I just enjoy it. It's like a game, it's a challenge. And then when you build a business based on science, then you open up the door for a lot of other areas of problem solving, and then they kind of like play into each other. So I think education is never a bad thing. Like back to the med school, like it wasn't for me, but I don't want to discourage anyone from following that path if that's where they truly feel to go in their heart. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves those questions honestly without other people's input before we can be honest with ourselves and follow that path. So again, I don't know if I answered the question, but
You did. It's perfect. So, okay, let's take one more step back. Right? Let's go to undergrad. Like, what were some resources you wished you use, or like what were some underrated resources at UCLA or at university in general that you used and that you wished other people use that would accelerate their professional journey like much quicker?
That's a good question. I wish I'd used more resources. You know, my first couple of years actually in undergrad, I was not terribly focused on academics. And so that was part of the reason I decided to take some time off and kind of regroup myself. And then by the time I'd come back to finish undergrad, at that time I was working a full-time job on top of the full course load. So the reason I say this is there was limitations in what I could search and use in terms of resources at the university. However, I will say volunteering in labs is a very beneficial experience. I tried to volunteer in a lab while, you know, working 52 hours a week on top of a full course load. And I tried to make it work. It didn't work. The guy was like, you know, why haven't you done this? It's been a week. And then when I told him what I had going on, he's like, why would you even think about trying to do it? You know, experience is very valuable. I'd also joined a student group that focused on they had these programs that helped educate high school students in STEM subjects. So it was a really fun way to give back and also design these like themed presentations and kind of activities around scientific topics. And I think getting involved in student groups, you know, in specific areas of interest are always huge resources. And, you know, I mean, even just asking like an academic counselor or someone, faculty member, you know, like they know better than I do any of the resources at the university. And I think it's important to explore that. I mean, there's so many resources. These universities are massive here, and they have so much going on. And, you know, it'd probably take your whole undergrad just to figure out, you know, everything that they do have to offer. Yeah. But those are the ones that, you know, were beneficial for me.
Okay, yeah.
That is super cool. Yeah, I completely agree, especially with the student groups aspect. Me and Hriday met through an entrepreneurship society. So definitely do join student groups if you're in university, for all the viewers. Let's talk more about the future of your role and the industry that you are in biotechnology. As CEO of Metaba, what breakthroughs do you anticipate in metabolomics and the biopharmaceutical development process?
That is a tough question to answer right now. I mean, there will be constantly scientific breakthroughs, right? That's without a doubt. What I see specific in our areas, you know, I believe in the oxysterol platform. You know, you may have done a little research, and I know you're interviewing Farhad tomorrow. And so he's built this amazing platform of oxysterol compounds, and he'll definitely tell you a lot more about that. But I think the really exciting thing about this chemical class is that you make these very minor chemical structural changes to the molecule, and then you have wildly different properties, right? So Farhad is about to enter phase 1 clinical trials for a drug that has bone formation, one that has liver disease for NASH, And then we've identified one that directly kills tuberculosis amongst many other assets. I mean, bone formation, liver disease, bacterial infection, right? These are very, very different diseases, and you wouldn't particularly expect the same chemical class to be an effective therapeutic in all these indications. So we've been really excited to kind of expand the oxysteroid therapeutics platform into antibiotics, applying our expertise in microbiology and infectious diseases. And so I think that's going to be in itself like a breakthrough first-in-class drug for potentially a lot of different diseases. And the metabolomics one, there's so many ways I can go about answering this question. I personally believe diagnostics is the future, right? Even of the pharmaceutical industry, because as we begin to have these deeper molecular understandings of disease, right, then we can better identify who to treat with what, right? So for example, you have this one symptom and it can be caused by 10 different molecular underlying, right, mechanisms, right? And so historically we've seen these like big blockbuster drugs that just treat a symptom. But then as we understand, and with clinical trials, maybe a certain population, percentage of the population isn't responding, it's because there's a different underlying mechanism that's causing this symptom. So I think the future will be diagnostics, right? To be able to differentiate who to treat with what, also understand how patients are responding to treatments potentially sooner, as well as pharma being more segmented because of that. And I mean, there's so many more things I could say about metabolomics, but I guess we'll leave it at there.
I mean, yeah, you could okay, so like you said, like there's so much more to learn about metabolomics and even oxysterols. Just for our viewers, what is a resource you can point them to kind of, if they want to dig about this and go more deeper, like where would you point them?
That's a great question. I mean, you can start with our websites. I think Farhad has a lot of information on the oxysterols. He has a lot of publications. Right. It depends on the reader as well. Like I personally would point them to specific scientific peer-reviewed publication because that's the real information. But I think there's probably a lot more on metabolomics that you can just search and probably get a good understanding of. There's a lot of CROs that provide these services. There's a lot of metabolomics cores at universities as well. Right. So that could potentially be a resource to look into at the university. And oxysterols is a little different because it's, you search and publications maybe over a decade ago, you're only going to see stuff about immune oxysterols. And that's how they've historically been viewed. They have this one function in this, immune response. That's why I think it's really exciting how Farhad kind of pioneered this field, because no one thought this could be used as a therapeutic, right? And they kind of like, oh, well, we can change these molecules a little bit and look at this. So it's really amazing what they've done. And they're not the only ones developing oxysterols as therapeutics as well now. So that just kind of is a testament to the power of what they found. But yeah, I mean, there's so many resources, so much information out there today. But ultimately, and this might be my perspective as well, like headlines are typically watered down and might not be the full story. So I always encourage people to look at the scientific research and make their own conclusions, because sometimes like conclusions of scientific research are not the full story either, right? Where we're constantly learning more and things that we thought were natural law kind of evolve over time as well, right? As we gain a deeper understanding. I always get into like the philosophical kind of,
That makes lots of sense. I think what you talked about like generalization through a drug class for, I guess, like disorders or diseases, that is more scalable as well. And like purely in terms of biotechnology and selling products and commercialization, that is really important. But also diagnostics and personalization based on person's, I guess, biology is also really important, because that is more advanced treatment. So that's where biotech is going, in my opinion, too. And I think in yours as well. Now, let's talk about AI/ML. What do you think? How do you think AI and machine learning are shaping the future of drug discovery, particularly for diseases, let's say, like tuberculosis?
That's a great question. So there is AI/ML kind of used in all processes of drug discovery all the way through marketing. If it's a useful tool, people are using it for all kinds of applications, right? They're optimizing clinical trials with, these data sets to decide which asset has a higher chance of passing that phase, right? Because that's a business decision, right, for a big pharma. All the way down to beginnings of drug discovery, where you have like a specific molecular target and you want to model this with a new drug compound and how to change that structure to make it more effective. And so I mean, this technology is changing so rapidly, it's hard to say where it's going to go. But I will say right now, it seems to be relatively effective in the very early basic sort of forms in terms of like the drug discovery, right? I mean, it's still computationally heavy to bring this, 3D modeling of this space and sampling all these points and then optimizing how it's fitting. And if you think about it, like it's pretty computationally heavy. And that's just a target and a ligand, right? This one single interaction. And I think where AI, it might be vastly difficult to find the computation to model the physiology of even a mouse, right? Not even getting into a human being. But when you're talking about drug development, there's so many things besides just one thing interacting with another, right? It's like, okay, are you taking it orally? Are you taking it nasally, et cetera? Like where is that going to the body? Where is it targeted? How is it metabolized? What are the levels in these different tissues? Is it, and then it just like, there's like so many complexities. And I think there's still so much to learn even about just how the human body functions in a lot of ways, let alone being able to accurately model that on a computational level. However, there are some interesting things happening with usually like the quantum computing, or biological computing. I think natural environment, maybe that's what I was looking for. So instead of having like these ones and zeros, circuitry, you have these problems being modeled in its native environment, right? With quantum mechanics, you're looking at these physics problems, which could also incorporate biology. So if a technology like that gets developed to a point where we're using it in context with AI, I mean, maybe it can model the human physiology and how drugs are metabolized on a very specific level. Like this could happen. I don't know. But needless to say, there's a ton of value to be added using AI and ML, especially with all the research that has been done. There's these massive, massive data sets. And I think one of the obstacles is the data being clean, right, and usable. And I think this is something that data scientists have had issues with. For example, medical records, and you have people inputting different abbreviations, different codes, and it's not all standardized. And so I think the best thing we can do in terms of data collection now is try to standardize it as best as possible. And this is especially for metabolomics, which is just maybe impossible to standardize, right? Because depending on what you're looking at, you need to change the parameters. You have different machines, different columns, different extraction buffers, different extraction methods, different ways samples are handled. And then you have different compound, characteristics that you have to modify this to detect properly. So I think metabolomics, LCMS is just inherently difficult to standardize across the board. But that doesn't mean we can't standardize like certain ways of doing things. And this is kind of getting into the personalization. One of the things that we're kind of working on is, this idea of a personalized vitamin recommendation or even a nutritional health plan. And, the thought is from a couple drops of blood, we can detect thousands of metabolites and from what you're specifically depleted in, give you a recommendation based on that. And so in building this type of product, you need data to inform what is or is not working in terms of a vitamin or a supplement for the individual. And it might not be the exact answer right off the bat, but if we start to standardize the methods of collection, of data processing, of analysis, and we can build like an automated pipeline of this, that is ripe for AI ML use. Right. So I guess the caveat is, yes, there's a lot of big data out there that we can use AI and ML for, but at the same time, we want to be aware of the data that we're putting into it because we might get answers that are not necessarily accurate just because of inconsistencies in the data collection, input, et cetera, methods, right, that you're training the model on.
Yeah. I mean, very, very profound, honestly, because AI is definitely going to make an impact, but it's like, how are we preparing for it? Or like, how are we kind of setting up AI to do that? So yeah, you answer a very important topic there. But also like I wanted to like slightly change topic and like move towards like I want to ask you, back in the day when you were trying to find your path, what were some important questions you asked yourself that you would want our listeners to ask themselves to kind of help clarify what they really want to do and what they really like can fit into in the industry?
I mean, you asked the question right there. That's the only one. What do you want to do? And I think it's easy to ask that question and then move on to the next thing quickly. But I think if you really sit with that question, like just sit with it, just that one question, and some things will start to come to you if you really listen. And that's really the only question to ask. Like, what do you want? What do you want? And if you have to keep asking yourself that question for the amount of time you're pondering it, because I can say, you might not get it in the first sitting. You can maybe sit there for an hour and you're thinking about what TV show you're going to watch tomorrow or whatever it is. Our mind is wired to kind of, especially in the Western world, just be constantly moving from one thing to the next. A lot of things are designed in this instant gratification, right? Just stream. And I think that's what it is. Just sit down, ask that question, and give yourself the time and the space to receive the answers. Because that's truly what happened to me. Sometimes people will make vision boards or try to visualize what they want. And this is getting into like the philosophical stuff again. I had started doing that, and then I think I got to a point where what I received, or kind of how I thought about it, was like, do I even know what's best for myself? Right? It's like I have this visualization image of where I want to be, but like, is that where I should be? Right? And so instead of trying to be highly specific and want what I wanted to manifest in my future, I started to just be open to being led to where I can be most effective. And it seems like sometimes I'll do things and say things that seem just like illogical and make no sense. And sometimes it seems like that to me as well, from like a causal kind of logical perspective. But at the same time, I suppose it's been a kind of intuitive like guidance that like I can't explain it, but I know this is what I need to do. It makes no sense to me why I'm doing this, but it has to happen. And I can't explain it, right?
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I mean,
Good, I'm glad.
Philosophically, I think like things should not really make sense at first, but when you sit and like actually try and understand it, then you do.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like hindsight 2020, right? In
Yeah.
the moment, we can't see the bigger picture. We can't see how things are kind of like coming together in front of us because we're in the middle of it, but then looking back on it, it's like, yeah, of course. It's kind of like that. So I'm glad you're following along and agree.
Yeah. No, actually it reminds me of like, I don't know, I think it was maybe in one of my classes, maybe an entrepreneurship class, but like the mindset was you don't have to think about what's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. You need to think about what your next best step is and just do that. And then what your next best step, and just do that. Just keep on stepping and thinking what your next best step would be and just keep on doing that. I feel like it's very similar to what you're saying right here as well. At every step of the way, just say, what do I want to do? What's the next best step? And I feel like that would lead you somewhere.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah. That's really great advice too, because I was a victim of severe procrastination at a lot of points in my life. I'm sure people can relate. And for me, I started to build up guilt, right? Mm-hmm. And it was starting to make me, not feel so great. Maybe I wasn't sleeping well. Maybe I wasn't eating well to compensate for whatever this feeling was, until I recognized what was building that guilt. And it was these small little procrastinations, like, okay. And a lot of it based on what you said, right? It's easy to look at the big goal, the big mission, and just be kind of overwhelmed. Like, where do I even start? And that was my justification for procrastinating. It's like, okay, well, I can't finish this right now, or even a week from now, so why even start? Or I'll get to it later, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the very effective things that I started doing when I recognized that guilt was building up was like, as soon as I think about it, do it, right? And it doesn't have to be solved that day, that sitting.
Right.
But there's something I can do towards that goal, It doesn't have to push the needle to the other side, but action, right? That's the bottom line, is action. Next step, next best step, right? And also looking back at things, it's like we can't, or it's not wise to beat ourselves up over certain decisions that may have not worked out as we expected, right? Because we later probably have more information that we didn't have at that point in time where we were making our best decision, right? So I think the important thing is always learning the lesson, moving on, and that's especially important for entrepreneurship, because a lot of the times, you're going to have to learn the hard way, and that's just life.
Definitely. Okay, I mean, this has been great. So now we'll be moving on to our last section, which is a rapid fire sort of thing. So I'll just ask the question. You can answer in like a minute, in a sentence or a word, right?
You're limiting me. You're like, all right, I don't need hour-long answers to questions I didn't even ask.
1 minute only. Okay.
I'll do my best.
Okay, so my first question to you is, what topic in the healthcare industry do you love the most?
I think strategy generally. I remember the most fascinating presentation I think I ever heard was one about this guy who done his PhD in chemistry, then got a law degree and specialized in litigation of microbiome research. So after this presentation, I'm like, I'm not going back to med school. I'm probably not going to get my PhD, but if I go and get an advanced degree, it might be a JD, even though it's not really required for litigation. But I thought it was fascinating, like the scientific technicality of writing and the language and all these very minute things, and then the interesting kind of cases that came out of it. So I think that's the topic: IP strategy.
IP and strategy in healthcare. Yeah, very, very niche topic and definitely very interesting. I hope we get someone on the podcast to talk about this. It's really interesting. Yeah, so like I want to ask about, what do you love about your role?
Everything. I love everything about the role. I love, the problem solving on the surface. I love the people. I'm really grateful to have met amazing people that are willing to help towards the mission, or give guidance. And even the tough, grueling times, like there's something about it that I just enjoy because I'm crazy like that.
Yeah, I love his mindset.
Yeah.
Okay, you already kind of talked about this, but what do you dislike about your role?
Yeah. That was a question that I probably have to think for even more than just a minute to even like begin to answer this. Because I'm not sure there is anything that I dislike. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to it.
Sure.
I know you want to hear an answer, but I just don't.
Okay.
I guess driving in LA to the lab, like that's like the thing and I don't even dislike that. Like I enjoy it because I'll listen to a podcast or I'll listen to music. Sometimes I'll just sit in silence and just enjoy the views of LA if it's really going slow, right? But I enjoy my drives, or I'll call a friend or a family member. So I don't know. I really can't think of anything.
I think the fact that you don't have an answer says a lot. I guess like what people truly want. I think lots of people want to be like that. I never want to have anything that I dislike about my role. So yeah, that speaks a lot too, saying nothing.
Thank you. And that's how it should be.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, what is an interesting networking story that taught you a lot?
I don't know if it's necessarily a story. Well, I guess I can make a story around it or an example. I think it's something I share from time to time. But in terms of networking, I don't always network for myself. I just network, because if there's people working on similar things or I think they can do work together, like I want to connect them. And I'm always thinking about different ways to collaborate, whether it's with myself, something we're doing, or someone else. Because I think that's really how we drive innovation, right? It's multidisciplinary. It's diverse thoughts and diverse teams coming together from different scientific backgrounds, all kinds of backgrounds, right? Coming together to solve a problem. So it's something I firmly believe in. But also for networking, like for yourself and for your company and whatever you're working on. And this kind of goes back to the perspective of like having a pretty wide net of understanding in context, is because you can present your idea in a lot of different ways. And I think the important thing is to understand who your audience is. If I'm talking about tuberculosis, and this comes through the example, to a scientific, review committee, like, right, I'm going to be using different language and describing different things than I am to someone who is like a public health professional or even a business development person, right? The things that they're looking for, the things that they are interested in are very different. And so bringing it to an example, there was a panel speaking about diversity in LA, and they're talking about all these the future of biotech in LA. And it was clear what this panel was interested in, right? So speaking with one of the panelists afterward and describing what I work on, instead of focusing on the science of tuberculosis or this or that, I talked about how it disproportionately affects minorities, and the homeless population and the incarcerated population in California, right? Not just, underserved areas in the world. And so it's important to have all the facts of what you're working on, because it allows you the flexibility to present it in a lot of different ways to make it more effective to your audience at the time. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing advice. I mean, never thought about it that way. Yeah. I mean, that's why it's so good to be knowing about everything that's going on around the world, to just like be able to present it in like a lot of different angles. It's very well said. Yeah, I mean, okay, so moving on to the next question is what is your favorite source of healthcare related information?
People, the
Yeah.
people that are there working on it, describing the things that they see. Truly, yeah, people.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And my last question to you, and you already partially like, answered this one too before, but I'd like you to find another thing. Is what is a wise quote that has stuck with you over the years?
I don't even remember the one I said earlier, but for some reason, LA traffic is in my head from the previous answer. And a great quote that was said is, "They can't cut you off if you let them in." So that's a good quote I tend to share a lot when people are complaining about LA traffic. But I think, yeah, there's so many great quotes and there's so many great books I can recommend. It's kind of endless, but I think it's a matter of perspective as well. Like that, right?
Okay.
If I let them in, they're not cutting me off, right? But it's the same thing, and it's all my perspective.
Exactly.
Right? They're getting in front of me, but I'm letting them. So I'm fine instead of, they cut me off. You know?
I think that's like a fine line between competitiveness and jealousy. And you should never cross that for your own fulfillment, because there will always be people who are doing a lot. And from one's perspective, what another person is doing might be novel. And because of that, it's better. That's what people think. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's very open to interpretation. Like the way I personally interpreted it was like it's about matter of perspective, very similar, but it's more so how you control your reaction to when something happens. Is like, do you act in a more aggressive way, like, oh, he cut me off, or you just be like, oh, I let him in. Like it's a difference of reaction more than reaction influences emotion in a way. And that's what it reminded me of. So
those are very great points. And it's like, if I don't have any expectations, then I can't get, I'm blanking on the word. If I don't have any expectations, I can't be disappointed. And then you mentioned other people perspective with that. And that's something I really try to do myself, is be unassuming,
right.
Because I don't really know the full story of what's going on. I don't know the full situation. I don't know where someone has come from, what they've gone through. And I just try to be fully unassuming as possible. And I'm not perfect at it, right? But it's something I try to remain conscious of and practice on a regular basis. Now I want to share this. I guess it's kind of a quote story thing, but it was one that really stuck with me. And it may have been told as the Chinese farmer story. I call it, I told you this one already.
Yeah.
So I'll leave this for the podcast listeners. I like to call it maybe so, maybe not. Anyways, it's a story of this Chinese farmer and his son, however many centuries ago, and they have this farm, they have a horse, and it's basically their livelihood, right? To harvest these crops and live. And so one day the horse runs away. And the neighbor sees this and comes over and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry that your horse is gone. How are you and your son alone without the horse going to be able to till the field, etc.?" And the father's like, "Oh, it's okay." And he's like, "No, but this is a big problem. Like, this is bad. And he said, "Maybe so, maybe not." And then a week later, the horse runs back with 4 other wild horses. So they have 5 horses now. And so, that's amazing, right? And then, the son is training these wild horses so they can use them to be even more productive. And one of the days when the son is riding the horse and training it, he falls off and breaks his leg. Again, the neighbor comes over and he's like, "Oh, that's so terrible. You just got all these horses and you're not going to be able to train them all without your son. And who else can help you with the field?" Same idea. And he's like, "Oh, maybe so, maybe not." And then another week later, the general comes by recruiting young men to the army to essentially go get slaughtered.